Keir Starmer's abandonment of his tuition fees pledge has put his trustworthiness back in the spotlight, and Rachel Reeves was left to answer for him on Good Morning Britain.
Is it a reasonable question for people to ask whether they can believe anything that Keir Starmer does actually pledge? Because scrapping the tuition fees was a pledge that he made during his campaign to be Labour leader. So people would have voted for him, perhaps on that basis. He also said he would increase income tax for the top earners, top 5% of earners, backtracked on that. Supporting common ownership of rail, mail, energy and water. You say spending billions of pounds on nationalising things just doesn't stack up. And he pledged he'd work shoulder to shoulder with unions to stand up for working people, but doesn't back the strikes.
And abolish universal credit, which isn't going to be due, and defend free movement as we leave the EU. All of these were his pledges.
Well, let me just remind you of some of the other pledges. To have an employment bill to extend workers' rights, the biggest devolution in a generation.
The question is about the pledges that he won't. That he said, and he's now.
That's not how pledges work. It's not a shopping list. It's like, well, I got you something. It's a pledge. It's a promise. Because you broke all of these promises. Well, I kept 3 of them. You know, you broke 9 promises you made to me, but look at the 3 that I kept. The word is pledge, as actually many of the clips going around on social media of Keir Starmer at the moment, where he's saying, of course, he's asked by Andrew Neil, will you abolish tuition fees? He says, yes, it's a pledge, so I will. Now, apparently, you're allowed to drop 2/3 of your pledges so long as you keep 1/3 of them, although, I doubt they'll probably make the cut. Anyway, let's see what happened next. Was Rachel Reeves able to hold firm to that line?
How do we know what you are saying now is something that you will deliver on in the future, where the promises and the pledges that were made in the past is now a pick and mix style of manifesto?
Let me answer that question. Let me answer that question that you've put to me. Look, circumstances change in politics, and I don't think anybody would seriously say that the circumstances when Keir became leader of the Labour Party are the same as the circumstances that we face today, when we've had the global pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the Conservatives' mini-budget last year that crashed the economy, a massive cost of living crisis, and public services on their knees. Now, look, you could be an ideologue and say, well, regardless of the circumstances,
change, but principles shouldn't.
No, and principles don't change, but the priorities and the policies must change according to the circumstances.
Let me answer the question. Let me answer the question. She was able to answer the question. The serious point here, she is saying that, these were principles, these were policies he did genuinely back, but circumstances changed. Now, the Labour Party does have a story to tell here, because there were some pretty big circumstances. There was COVID, there was a war in Ukraine, but it still doesn't stack up to me. This clip of Margaret Hodge is from during the leadership election, so back in 2019 or the beginning of 2020, and it's been recirculating online.
He's triangulating like mad. Somebody said to me, I don't mind what he does as long as he wins, beats Rebecca Long Bailey. And I thought, Tony never did that. Tony was completely straight, completely honest. It's a different way of doing your politics. So is Keir lying to get the job, and will he then change? That's what this person was saying to me, as a way of promoting Keir. I mean, that's sort of, I know. So that's sort of, in a way, you then think,
James, do you think that the pledges have been dropped because circumstances changed, or do you think he was lying all along, essentially?
It's sort of not that clear, like how far back Keir personally had a commitment to not being committed to things. But what's quite striking about it is that it's like whoever was around him didn't have, and this is a continual issue with his leadership, there doesn't seem to be any sense of things will have to happen in the future. And what you can do in the future is going to be determined by what you do today. So if you've told everybody you will do this thing in the future if you're elected, and this is what you're campaigning for to be prime minister, and it will include getting rid of tuition fees. If you turn around later and say, oh, we're not actually going to do that, along with a whole stack of other stuff we're now not going to do, this will get used against you. Like there are 2 now fairly obvious attack lines for the Tories to go for, like just on quite a personal basis with Keir Starmer. One of which is his record as DPP, which I think they're going to go crazy about in one form or another. And the other of which is this, which is like, if his own party members say they can't trust him and can't trust him, why should you, the electorate of Britain, trust him? And they'll just do that. And it's so obvious that this is what you open up yourself for. That regardless of saying, oh well, we had some COVID, and that's why because there's more people who need help now, we have to do less. It's just not the most obvious argument to try and present to people. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to say, we had this big thing we wanted to do. I mean, to scrap tuition fees is £7 billion. It was the costing in 2019, so it'll be a bit more than that now. That's the cost. That's something you could raise from, there's all sorts of things, equalising capital gains tax with income tax would cover double, in fact, that. It's about 14 billion from that tax change alone. You can do these things if you're prepared to say, well, we're going to spend more money, maybe we'll borrow more, maybe we'll tax some rich people more than we would have said previously. Fine, you can do that. That might be an adaptation to circumstances after COVID, economy slowing down, Tories done a lot of damage, older story that Labour wants to tell. Well, your adaptation might then include, okay, now we're going to have to spend more and do more. It doesn't include that. There's a clear sort of line of march here into sort of into doing very little, or rather, and this may be the worst possible version of it, doing some stuff in a kind of technocratic, not particularly interesting to most people way. Like, there'll probably be more interventionists in the economy in various different forms. Will that stack up into people's lives being made better pretty rapidly if Labour get elected? And I do think there's an if attached to this. Well, it's not going to do that. The best you could say, perhaps, and this seems to be the shift since the end of last year coming into this, is that Rishi Sunak, who, we now have two party leaders who say things in their leadership campaign and then do something different once they're actually prime minister. Rishi Sunak, supposedly from the free market right of the Tory party, actually overseeing some increases in public spending, particularly around childcare, for example, straight into sort of Labour territory, exactly straight out of the Boris Johnson playbook, closing down one of the things that Labour had been trying to talk about as the thing they were going to do. So there's a kind of lack of imagination in the response to this, that because the Tories have entirely predictably, because Johnson was already doing this and had done since 2019, gone very directly into what Labour thought was its territory of public spending, and they've carried on doing that because it works for them and they can get away with it. They don't have any real response other than sort of wandering off and actually saying, oh, we're going to do even less than we promised initially. It doesn't function as a coherent political project. The only coherence to it is, we are not Jeremy Corbyn, so we're going to bash the left a bit more. It doesn't add up to a project that you can present to the wider population in the election, because what does it actually stand for? What is it really going to do? Because you've stripped out a load of things. And it doesn't add up to a project, I don't think, for government, because you're actually going to have to, particularly if it's a slender majority or a minority government, you're going to have to rely on a wide base of social acceptance for some of what you want to do. You're going to need the trade unions supporting you. You're going to want the left supporting you in some form, because otherwise you're going to be in a worsening crisis in this country with a whole load of promises or half promises that you've either ditched, or things you say you're half going to do, whatever the manifesto looks like. And where's your popular support for doing this? Where's the base of support you can rely on to say to trade unions, we will meet your pay demands? You've not got that. So the more this goes on, the more the kind of 1990s rerun that I think some people have in their heads about what the world is like now, it's just not going to work. It's going to meet the hard reality of 2023 into 2024. And it makes that prospect of a Labour government increasingly unlikely the more it continues like this.
You were someone who used to be a bit more positive about, say, Labour's economic programme under Starmer and Reeves than other people, sort of pointing out the climate pledges or whatever. Are you now, much more cynical than you were, say, 12 months ago?
Always cynical. I've always been cynical. These people say these things because they think they have to say them, and this is just how the world is going. The world is heading, capitalism in the West is heading in a more interventionist direction. Lo and behold, you get a Tory party that's more interventionist, you get a Labour party that's more interventionist. There's a nice little article in The Economist about it this week. That's how things are working. What we're starting to see with Keir Starmer is a hollowing out even of that bit they got to, where it's slightly more interventionist, a bit more spending. And I think there's real dangers. Ed Balls, for instance, has been one of the people chiselling away at that climate spending pledge. One of the few things that Keir Starmer's Labour has said it will do that's quite big, quite meaty, looks serious, looks like he'll do something. It's being pushed away at by figures on the party right. So there's a real sort of weakness and hollowness to the project at this point on the policy side, that getting rid of further policies, whatever promises you used to have in the past, reinforces and means that your party project is weaker than it was even 12 months ago, even 3 months ago, frankly.